Given to me by Woody Shaw, Sunship, Dizzy, and John Kahn. Dedicated to pursuing a piece of our cultural heritage through interviews with my music heroes. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Above the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real artists. As we say goodbye to 2014, enter into a new year, the Jake Feinberg Show continues to be humbled by the accessibility of my guest and his generation. They're not uptight. They groove. They swing. They don't romanticize sometimes. And like my guest, they write different chapters in their musical memoirs, some filled with bright lights, others with dimly lit lanterns. My guest today fills in the gaps of his musical career with massive chops that he has been using since he was crisscrossing upstate New York with Wilmer and The Dukes, playing fraternity houses and back alley bars, playing music somewhere between Otis Redding mixed with blue-eyed soul jazz. His career really started in his house in Rochester, playing beer barrel polka. Well, we've lost Gap Mangione. For those familiar with the Mangione family, Chuck Mangione went on to stardom. Some people would call that being famous in a capitalistic sense in that he made a lot of money. But his older brother, Gap, was actually as impressive, if not more impressive, a musician. Just did a ton of albums in the early 70s that are only now really becoming to the forefront here. Sing-along junk, the kids call it boogie, and just a whole lot of different stuff here. So his career started in Rochester, playing beer barrel polkas and toe-tapping Italian folk tunes as his relatives danced and jammed all night. He encouraged his younger brother Chuck to play music, and the Jazz Brothers, as they came to be known, were making up the rules, playing concerts with acoustic instruments and string arrangements. Academia, for better or for worse, is not boxed in the music, had not boxed in the music, or made the music conform to how the departments can bring in the most money. You see, music my guest makes, whether it's driving in a yellow camper, swinging Dixie with the Salt City Six, or just playing some sing-along junk, is the music of feeling. Throw out the books, unlock your ears, and adapt to those around you. He knows he can blow if he has to, but he would prefer to call and respond with Steve Gadd and Sal Nistico, Tony Levin and Esther Satterfield. High-stepping into the new year, still calling it boogie, Gap Mangione, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, Jake.
Nice to hear you, man.
Well, thank you.
Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Can you please tell the story of how you met Cannonball Adderley?
Oh, well, actually, I'd seen him play and all that prior to this time, but it was the night before New Year's Eve, a while ago, a long time ago, and a girlfriend and I were out that evening because we had heard that there was some really good jazz to be heard at some place south of Geneva. Now, Geneva is a comparatively small town outside of Rochester, and when we got south of Geneva, it was pretty much farms and fields and stuff. Anyway, through a series of asking and looking and trying, we found this kind of large farmhouse that had been turned into a bar and restaurant, small bar, small restaurant, and went there, walked in, and it was a long bar with a lot of people at it, and, drinking beer, having a good time. And then in the back, the small room where they obviously served sandwiches and things for lunch and that, there was a group of people back there and some music that I just couldn't believe. Essentially, walked in and there was Paul Chambers, Sonny Clark, Billy Joe Jones, and Cannonball Adderley playing this gig.
Wow.
Apparently, it was a payback for some obligation that Billy Joe owed to the guy who owned this building and this restaurant. And it was Miles's band without Miles. Walked in, and of course, I made my way to what at the time was the only phone around, a payphone, and within an hour I had at least 25 friends and relatives of mine there. But that's how we met. I just walked in, and there they were playing. We got to talking and all, and during the course of the night, Camden asked us to sit in. Chuck, myself, and another person who was with us.
I want to go back to something. This is a very important story. When you said your girlfriend and you heard that there was some good jazz. What did that mean? Yeah. What did that mean to you? That word, jazz, has become so contorted at that time. Gap. What did good jazz mean to you?
Well, actually, frankly, attractive jazz-oriented music is what it meant to me at the time. When someone asked, I remember long ago when someone would say, "Do you like jazz?" And of course you'd stop and say, "Well, do you mean Louis Armstrong or Thelonious Monk or Cecil Taylor or Count Basie or
Right.
Sure, but for definitions, that's probably not worth the time it would take to go around that trying to define it and all. But essentially that attractive jazz-oriented music.
But also there was a burn to it. I mean, did it have an Afrocentric flavor to it? I mean, you saw Miles's band without Miles.
That's true. Did it have a burn to it?
I mean, I guess
obviously, all you had to do was read the personnel. You didn't have to be there. Those people never played without an internal burn. I mean, they had it on all the time, and they were having it on. I mean, this was not there was never a casual engagement for these people that I can imagine.
Can you? So I didn't mean to truncate that. So Cannon said, "Gap, Chuck, come on up to the stage. Why don't you sit in?"
Well, there was quite a bit of interaction socially and conversationally between the time that I walked in and the time later when my father showed up with my brother and some other relatives and other friends and all that. I'm no fool. I went up and introduced myself to Cannon, and he kind of knew about us. I don't quite know how. We were really kids at the time, but a number of years later, when I asked Nat, his brother, about why Cannon decided to have us, the Jazz Brothers, as part of his Cannonball Presents series on the Riverside label, a major label at the time, I mentioned, I said, there was this kind of 45 RPM that we had put out, a single with Chuck and Sal and a bunch of us. And I thought perhaps he had gotten his hands on that, and Nat said, no, he remembered you from that session at the farmhouse outside of Geneva. So apparently it was important enough, and we made enough of an impression so that, I guess it was about a year and a half later, he was in touch with me directly by phone, and asked us if we were interested in being on Riverside as part of his Cannon Presents series. And I, of course, being no fool, said yes.
Gap, as I go into 2015, part of my show is going to slant towards immigration and new immigrants coming here from Africa and Asia in the 21st century, but also compelling stories of cats that came over here at a different time. And like Aerto Moriera, basically got citizenship from Cannon. Cannon helped him get citizenship when he was here, and I wanted you to talk about your family, specifically growing up, first generation Italian family. I've done this with Don Menza, and I wanted you to talk about the environment within the household, the best you can, how your family helped you develop individuality in music and in life.
Wow. You said this is only an hour, not 4 hours.
we're eventually we'll get to 4. No, listen, but just don't sweat it. This is set 1. You know.
No. I'm kidding. Of course. We were not the first generation. My parents were. My grandparents were born in Sicily, all 4 of them, and within 50 miles of each other in Sicily. So that's kind of how very focused our background is. Interestingly enough, 2 of my grandparents met and married in Sicily and then came to Rochester. And the other 2, my father's parents, didn't. My grandmother came here with a cousin of hers, and my grandfather, Gaspar, after whom I was named, decided to leave Sicily and go to Argentina. Well, what happened was he and some buddies went down to where the boat would depart from, and apparently they celebrated enough so that he missed the boat to Argentina. And I guess whether it was from embarrassment or for whatever else, he wasn't going home, so he just took the next boat, and the next boat dropped him off in Boston. And then he and my grandmother ended up in Rochester at the same time, and they met and married, and that's how that happened. So it's really a kind of roundabout thing. And in terms of what happened around the household, I think we were an awful lot like a lot of Italian families who, they doted on their children, or at least my parents did, and I know that many most Italian parents dote on their children. And in terms of directing us, it wasn't so much a matter of them saying, you ought to do this or you ought to do that, but more like finding or seeing an interest that we had, encouraging it in a whole lot of ways. When Chuck and I, as a matter of fact, when the 3 of us, my sister as well, Josephine, showed an interest in music, we were immediately offered, piano lessons. And my family was not at all well-to-do, so that all these things that most people these days would consider the norm, or yes, that's what people do. My parents had to go out of their way to find the means to do that, but they did. And when we needed instruments, we were never at a loss for instruments. So that that's how they kept. Oh, and once we were able to play, and that was a fairly short time, we were always encouraged, at least, if not elbowed pretty hard. Like if there was a family party going on, we were the entertainment.
And it's just, you are just filling vessels here so well, but I want, this is so vital because, what kind of piano, there were instruments all over the house. I mean, there were no curriculums, Gap. I mean, there were classical.
Oh, I know.
There were classical curriculums, but really, when it came to jazz, there was nothing. You guys were making up the rules. And for the record, how influential were you in getting Chuck involved with music?
Well, I think fairly influential is the answer to the last question. In terms of the instruments, my grandparents, again, my paternal grandparents, had a player piano at their house. And I remember I could entertain myself forever. At the time, there was no electrical or automated way for this instrument to play itself, so it was a matter of pushing the pedals and creating the vacuum and all that for it to work. But I was fascinated watching the keys and seeing what they looked like and hearing what came out of the piano when those keys went, would go down and up. I remember reading that Duke Ellington learned some of the James T. Johnson arrangements by slowing that process, that is a piano roll on a player piano, down so that he could see where it went. But I was fascinated with that. And we somehow ended up with a piano, an upright piano at our house. And then, of course, my brother with his trumpet and myself with the only portable keyboard at the time, an accordion. Those were our instruments. But again, in terms of my family's financial capability, they had to go well out of their way to provide those for us, and they did. But once we had them, it was always oh, gee, I sure love to hear you play. It wasn't like, oh, aren't you practicing? Sure would love to hear you play. That sounds like a good way to encourage somebody.
Unbelievable. But this is the confounding part. I mean, so you run into McCurdy and Cannon and, Sonny Clark and these guys. And next thing you know, Orrin Keep News is penning liner notes for you guys. I mean, the transition to Riverside is essential for cultural heritage, for Gap Mangione, the Jazz Brothers. I mean, did Cannon actually call you and be like, listen, I think we got something here? How did that?
No. I was on the bandstand at a place that was called the Pythodd, Pythodd. It's a famous, in the past tense way, club in Rochester where it was part of the Chitlin circuit, where every organ trio in the world would come through Rochester and play there, and we were kind of the house band. Looking back, it doesn't seem quite as surprising as it was at the time, but Chuck and either Sal Mystico or Joe Romano as a saxophone player, and I was a piano player. And at times, Ron Carter, when he was a student here, was the bass player in the band. Wow. And Roy McCurdy, who I'm sure you know from his work with Sonny Rollins, with Cannonball Adderley, with Nancy Wilson. He was a drummer. He was from Rochester too. about the only two guys. Sal Mystico was from Syracuse. When I was at Syracuse University, I ran into Sal as a 16 or 17-year-old kid who would come by on Saturdays to participate in our. We always try to have some kind of big band thing going on Saturday afternoons. And that's how I met Sal. So Sal from Syracuse, Ron Carter, who happened to be there because he was a student at Eastern School, and Chuck and I, and Roy McCurdy, who were from Rochester. But that was the band we were playing with. It turns out that it was a fairly fortuitous combination of players. But in terms of we were on the bandstand at the Pythodd one night, and there was a payphone there, and I don't know how the hell he found the number, but somebody answered the phone and said, "Gap is for you." And so it sounded important enough. I went over, and it was Cannon on the other end of the line. He had seen the 45 RPM single that we put out on our Manco label, Man for Mangione and Co for Company. And he asked if I could get out of the contract that he assumed existed for that 45 because he wanted us to record on Riverside. I said, Cannon, just let us out. and that's how that happened. We recorded the first album, a sextet. We had two saxophones and trumpet under the Cannonballs Presents series. And, it's a good thing we were the age that we were, and we had this kind of mentality that, allowed us not to be frightened, because when we did that first recording, Cannon was in the booth. I mean, he was slating the songs, take one, this and that, calling out the names of stuff, and encouraging us to either do another take or that one sounded great, yeah, and that kind of thing. And somehow, again, we should have been frightened, but we weren't. I mean, he was kind of. I knew him. We had met and hung out, played together. Hell.
But you were unafraid because the rudiments were there. I mean, you had already had that kind of. You knew you had the chops to play with them. Hey, but I know what you're saying. Youth can be the best tonic because you're not even aware of who you are in the room with. If you were, you might have gotten scared. But did you catch that opening tune that we played coming in to the?
I'm sorry, I didn't. No, I was.
That's where we lost.
I didn't.
This was the famous hit of Wilmer and The Dukes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're on B3.
Give me one more chance.
Give me one more. I mean, that sounds to me. You could go across the board to the Bay Area. A band with called Southern Comfort. There were soul groups, northern soul groups. I mean, that you guys were channeling this. I called it blue-eyed soul jazz. But again, we're jumping. We're not even going to get out of the '60s today, Gab. So don't even worry about it. But talk about the circuit, because that you guys used to travel. I spoke to a keyboardist a while back named Ozzy Allers, who was in the Wizards of Oz, another one of these bands that went up and down the coast. Talk about playing. How did you find this cat, the singer that?
There was an existent group. They came to me with that track, and what I did was write and then overdub the horns. And as a matter of fact, because, well, I not to put it indelicately, but the drummer wasn't really what it needed to be on that track. So I brought in Vinny Ruggiero, who played on the third Jazz Brothers. Yeah, a great jazz player, and he's the drummer on that. But we overdubbed everything. Our entire part of that recording that you heard had to do with after the fact. Put the drums on, put the horns on. Now, check this out. The two trumpets on that overdub was Chuck and Sam Noto. Sam Noto from
Buffalo,
the Kenton band from yes,
absolutely,
and from Boss Brass. Rob McConnell's group, a great player, and Dennis Good and Sonny Ausman, both of whom ended up with the Buddy Rich band, trombone players. Jerry and I we had just great horn, and my entire participation in that was to put the horn arrange and add the horns afterward. So I can't take credit for the style or the singing or even the original song.
You know, the idea there, though, who else, like you and Chuck, you got into Riverside, and that Jazz Brothers album, who is featured? I saw that yesterday, you put that post up, but who is in that quintet?
Well, actually, the first one was the sextet, and originally it was the Gap Mangione sextet. Somebody at Riverside came up with the idea for the name of the Jazz Brothers. We liked it a lot, and we went with that. Chuck, of course, was on trumpet. Sal Nistico on tenor saxophone. Roy McCurdy, pre-mentioned, the drummer. A bass player who was around for a very short time and not much before, much afterward, whose name was Bill Saunders. And another saxophone player whose name was Larry Combs, or is Larry Combs. He was an Eastman student from West Virginia. And he had a real good way playing alto saxophone. Interestingly enough, within, I'd say, maybe 3 years of him doing that album with us, he ended up as the principal clarinetist with the Chicago Symphony and spent, I'd say, at least 25 or 30 years in that position. He just retired recently. So that was the group. Chuck, Sal, Larry in the horn section, myself, Bill Saunders, and Roy McCurdy in the rhythm section. And immediately after the first recording, we were contracted for another 3 albums, 2 with the Jazz Brothers, and then Chuck did his first solo album on Riverside as well.
Well, we're in for a treat right now. This is a song that I've been channeling with both my daughters just to show off the Gap Mangione chops. We have a game on this program called Name That Tune. So try to name that tune, Gap. We'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Okay, sure.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, sponsored in part by Stereo Hospital, with over 40 years of experience repairing all types of home audio equipment, from vintage table radios to digital surround sound. At 4044 East Speedway inside Metronome Music, it's the place to take your turntable, CD player, tape deck, heck, just about anything to do with a stereo. Call 722 and 4610. They're the people to call. All right, Mr. Mangione, what do you got?
How's that for a quick jump 15 years?
No, but I want to tell you, okay, so that was riding in my yellow camper bus. Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah, yellow camper bus, right.
Okay, I mean, I want to ask you very seriously. You were playing the ARP. Was that, what instrument were you playing?
Well, there were two instruments that I know I played on that track, one of which was a plain old Fender Rhodes, but I had all kinds of effects, from the wah pedal to the fuzz tone that was three of us. That was essentially keyboards, bass, and drums, with Tony Levin on bass and Steve Gadd on drums. And we would do that in a club fairly often. I'm surprised that we actually tried to record that, but it seems to have come out.
There's some deep
it
funking.
was a whole different era, and certainly a whole different style of playing that from what would be represented on the Jazz Brothers albums from 15 years earlier. That was about 1975, an album called She and I, and the Kids Called It Boogie, that came out under both.
This is what I love the most, because I mean, you have to understand. I will go to the end of the earth to unleash all of this Gap Mangione material. I mean, some of the stuff that you have done is so, and I just love the burning energy between Levin, Gadd, and you. It's just, I really, to be honest with you, you listen to the melody of that track, and you're like, oh, this is kind of like a hippy dippy tune. And then all of a sudden, you just start to blow on it, and I'm like, this is funk, the funkiest. And
there's a breakdown in the middle where it changes substantially from the way it started and the way it ends to that middle part where it kind of at a half tempo or half time feeling gets into some, I don't know what you are, fusion? Is that what they called it at the time?
The kids
were reaching for some way to explain it.
The kids call it boogie, Gap, I wanted to ask you a little bit about looking forward to 2015. You're my guest here, last show of the 2014. What do you have? What do you have in mind for creativity? What kind of projects you got going on in 2015?
Well, a combination of the things that I've been doing all along. That is playing with a group that I call my new blues band. It's a guitar quartet: guitar, piano, bass, and drums. Two of the guys sing, and we've been at one venue since May of '87.
Wow.
That's getting to be a steady job, no? Anyway, we play regularly with that group. The venue we play is a kind of resort hotel just at the edge of Rochester, New York. And with that band, much has been the case pretty much in my most of my professional career. We get to play for a lot of different people, and we get to play a lot of different sorts of music for them. That's the main thing that I'm doing. We always do a number of big band dates during the course of a year. I have about 4 or 5 of them now, and by the end of the year, we should have perhaps double that. Mostly concert kinds of things with my big band. By the way, there's 3 CDs of that band out that you really ought to get your ears to because it's a real wonderful organization. And the third thing that I've decided to do here in late 2014 and 2015 is to go back and start doing the Jazz Brothers things again.
Beautiful.
So we're going to reach back at least 50 years, maybe more, to go back. But on the premise, much like Art Blakey did when he was, getting along in years, he was the only old guy in the band. Everybody else was 19 and 20 years old. And I've been gathering young people from around here. Some of them are really wonderful players, and I still have. I'm the kind of guy who wouldn't let that get away. So I have all the charts from the Jazz Brothers days, and we've gotten together a couple of times already playing some of that, and it's great fun. For the new guys, this is a revelation. They a lot of them don't even know about the Jazz Brothers, but they do now, and we've been having a great. So those are essentially the three projects. The other is the other thing that I intend to do in 2015, even more than I did this year, is to have the kind of interaction with my family that really supersedes all the rest of it. I have a number of grandchildren now, and I truly want to increase even more the time that we get to spend together. My wife, Janet, and I love hanging out with the family, and we're going to do that even more this year.
Well, Gap, I want to tell you, unexpected things have occurred on the Jake Feinberg Show today. We're going to do this. We're going to do 4 parts. I don't want you to be concerned. I wanted to thank you for taking this time, and I'll reach out to you, and we will cook again in the near future and do part 2. Okay. All right. And thank you so much, man. I hope you had a good time.
I did, and Happy New Year to you.
All right, Gap. I'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we'll be back in just a little bit.